met Angela, and yes, I had been working at a time, but had this happened earlier, when I came back from Vermont, my family really needed me for a bit, and so I didn't work for a short bit. Just to work at my parents' coffee shop and take care of my nephew and watch my brother's dog. And that was what our family needed at the time. And so we want to name that some families might need that extra bit of love, and that's great. And I don't know, other ideas that folks have been thinking about what they might do after high school? Yes, what are you thinking?
Win the lottery.
Hey, that is always a good plan, but seldom works out. If it does, go on that show and buy a house with that guy. I mean, that looks super fun. Oh gosh, whoever won that lottery a few weeks ago, they're just set for life. I want to know who the person is so I can just write them for, a small amount, like 100K or something. Because when you win $1 billion, what's 100K? It's like a penny.
Angela, did you just refer to that as a plan?
Plans are in the eye of the beholder. He might crack the code and figure out how to do it. There are some people who have won it multiple times, which means that it can be kind of cracked. Anyway, we'll get into that later, how to game the system and win the lottery. Yes?
I'm just going to throw out, as a parent with somebody with a disability, we were not aware of what services were available post-high school.
Mm-hmm.
We sent our child to a private high school, so she did not qualify for some services like through the community college because you had to have been enrolled in a public school with an IEP. So if you do have a child with disabilities, be aware that you need to check into what services are available, and there are things available. Eventually, we were able to get her into both rehab and Goodwill, but it took a little longer.
That's helpful to know, and I think that's another piece that we meant to highlight today is again, there are tons of resources in the room and people that can be helpful. I think that actually might be on the next slide. Sorry.
I think it is. So let's talk about that. Where do we begin on our next slide if we wanted to research our journey? Our church community is a wonderful place to start. And we have a lot of knowledge right here in the room. And so it's like, why not lean into people we know, family and friends? And we want to recognize that, your best support might not come from your parents, even though they might have a vision for you. But your best support might come from that aunt or that cousin who is just brutally honest. And who might give you that feedback, or who is not going to make you worried. You can ask them just about anything, and they'll still love you no matter what. Yeah, your parents will still love you too, but it might be a little higher stakes to ask your parents than it might be to ask your favorite aunt. So that's an opportunity that we say. Your high school guidance counselor is absolutely someone that we encourage you all to start to get relationships with. We also want to name that they are ridiculously busy people and have a pretty heavy caseload. So, I'm just saying that from the get-go. Hey, you guys are just in time. Come on down. We have plenty of room. Please get snacks. There's more. If anybody wants seconds, get more. We cannot underscore the importance of the library and physically going there. We can do all of the search pieces online, but they still have a number of books that can be helpful. And there's something about being in that library space that we know, especially here in Iowa City where we love our books and our libraries, that gives us a time to sit down and say, hey, let's think about what we're going to use this time for, so that way we've got that dedicated moment. And then professional organizations. For some of us, if we think that I want to go into a specialized field, if I wanted to be a radiation technology, or actually the example that I want to give you all is if I decided from a student that I had, she wanted to be a nurse. And she was waiting to find out if she was going to get into a particular nursing school. And the thing is that she was trying to come up with a backup plan. I'm not a nurse, but my mom is. And I was really impressed that when I said, hey, I'm trying to offer her some guidance, and she said, well, make sure you ask her about their NCLEX and whatever their success rate is. And I was like, I have no idea what any of that is that my mother just said. It could have been a medical thing. It turned out it was their rate of success that nurses have on their boards. And she says someone could go to any nursing school, but you would just want to hear how many of their graduates have achieved this board certification within that first or second year. I wouldn't have known that. But having a relationship with someone who's already in the field or being connected to a professional organization of nurses or welders, or within, like our field, we have a student affairs professionals group. You know, those are ways that you can find a little bit deeper questions to ask about your particular area of interest. Does that make sense? Trying to triangulate some things that made a lot of sense to us when we were chatting about it over dinner last week. But if it's not triangulating for you all, that's okay. Okay, so on your worksheet, we asked you all the question, who are 3 people that you might be able to talk about your professional ideas that may or may not be your parents? Okay, and likewise, for parents and families, as you are getting ready to transition someone into college, who can you talk to about that journey? Because you are also going on one, and it's good to have another parent to be able to chat it up with. Angela, you want to talk about our parent, like, dream parents that we talk about often? You have a special, like, name. See, I'm failing at this today. Well, there are some folks that we often look at and we think that they are like parent goals.
Yeah. So I actually have a colleague who has a son who's now 17, and she's just, I think, really good with her kids, and she'll talk about like the different things she does with them. He's 17, he's like 6'4", but she still takes off the first day of school every year, so that he's, you know, when he comes home, that she's there, right? This is his last first day of school, and she's doing it again. And she just does like really cool parenting things that I'm always like, okay, how did you navigate this? And so I think similarly, like there are folks in the room who have seen a child through that transition from post-secondary or secondary education to whatever comes after, who can provide support. So I see the Gibsons in the room, right? I'm thinking of, the Schmidt-Rundels, yeah, several, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of folks who have done this transition for students. You know, we can talk about it in theory, and we haven't done it, and we have a good amount of years until we do, right? And so we can imagine what that process will be like, but we don't have the concrete experience of doing that. But there are several folks in the congregation who do. The Houslers, right? They'll also talk to you all about scholarships and how you can win the scholarship lottery, things like that, right? So be thinking about who are those folks that we're networking with. Patty's just, you know, shown some knowledge about navigating pieces, especially for a student with disabilities. So thinking about our community and who you can have those conversations with as well.
Yeah. Aspirant parents, I think, is the way that we kind of look at it. You know, there's somebody who's like, man, I just watched you parent that kid from across the room in Target, and I want to be you. You know, same thing for the college journey. So think about that. Okay.
Well, and a comment when you were talking about guidance counselors, one of the best pieces of advice my sons were given by their high school counselor was, if you don't have any idea what you want to study in college, that's okay. There are counselors at the college who are not busy enough. High school, yes, they seem to be really busy, but that he felt that the guidance counselors and academic advisors, that's one of the lesser used services when you get to college. So even if you don't know what you want to study, yeah.
Like somewhere, there's an academic advisor at the University of Iowa who would be like, I'm so busy, I'm up to my ears in students. Especially at Iowa, there are some schools that don't mandate academic advising, and my school was one of them, and so I never really went. And managed to take the same gender women's studies class twice, even though it was very different both times. Anyway, that's why you go to your advisor early and often. But some schools don't mandate it. The University of Iowa does require students to go and get authorized in order to register for classes each semester. So they're meeting with all, 20,000 of our undergraduate students at the very least every semester, which there were not 20,000 advisors.
I think he was trying to reassure that you don't have to know what program you're going to study. You can maybe choose a college, right, a general, course of study.
You do not have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it walking in, and you can change it up. And if you can't find the right answer, you can do what I did and just design your own major, which totally works. There's a number of schools that allow you to do that because they recognize that your path is unique. Okay, what I'd like to do is move us into the next slide because I want to talk about support. And I think that this is really important. And I am sorry that these slides are so tiny. A, we'll share them with you. And B, that way, some of this is on your handout. But students, I think it's good for you all to talk about what kind of support do you want from your family and loved ones? You know, you might want to go and be able to ask them questions, or you might just want them to like pass over the credit card when you need to apply for a school, right? And I think it's good to kind of talk about that right now and to think about that right now. You might not have the right words to describe it because you don't know what you don't know. And I recognize that that's difficult.
Can I say a note on the other side of that coin of like, your student may just want your credit card, and that might not be what's on the menu. And that as long as you are clear and specific about that, I think that's helpful. One of the pieces I said early on in the prayer, I don't think you were here just yet, Rob, but you talked about that notion today of going from servant to friend. I think that some of that can also happen with the college or the post-secondary experience with their young people. It's on my Facebook memories because I posted about it years and years ago at this point, maybe 10 or more years ago. But my mom, one day when we were talking, she said, I feel like my work here is done. I think we're friends now. And I was just like, taken aback by that, like, oh my goodness, like we're there. It's not like it still doesn't happen. We still very much have like a parent-kid relationship, and I think college especially helped our relationship change in ways that I think was really helpful and really important. And so I know that there's always a level of sadness that comes with dropping your student off at whatever comes next. And I think that there's often something really beautiful beyond that too. I felt like my parents were okay people before they dropped me off at college, and then after college I felt like I really truly needed them. And I can think about times in grad school when they would leave Massachusetts and I'd be ugly crying in my apartment because I missed them so badly, right? That didn't happen in undergrad, but it definitely happened in my mid-20s. And so that is a changing relationship that I think can really deepen and become more intense as time goes by.
One thing for families and supporters to think about are what are the different ways that you can offer your support? And I think it's good to think about that right now. Are you able to offer emotional and spiritual support? Are you able to offer financial support? You know, or
and what does that look like?
And what does that look like? And we will talk about that in a moment. And then also too, are you able to offer vocational support? You know, if you happen to be in the field and your student wants to follow you, that's an interesting conversation to have. You know, for some, that's like a super proud moment, and even if they want to go into the same field, is your path going to get there going to be the same thing? You know, and so how do you navigate that vocational? So just a few things to think about. Now, the other piece that I want to highlight, I know that many of our families here have already sent one student off, or might have multiples coming down the road. And I think it's really helpful to name for the students one, that you are on your own journey, right? And your college or your post-secondary journey does not have to look like your siblings. For many institutions, actually about 25% of college students go to the same school where their older sibling goes, which is fascinating. I'm one of four, and the four of us all went to very, very different schools. Large public, small regional, private school, community college, and then a little bit more, you know, and that was just what worked for us. But for you, you have to think about that. And similarly, for family and friends, I wanted this to be a beautiful reminder for us that just because kiddo A did one thing, kiddo B's path might look very, very different. And all of you parent your children differently. You try to be consistent on some things, but let's be real. The first one gets one level of treatment. The one coming on the back end is just a whole different story.
I didn't believe that to be true until we were feeding Josephine ice cream like a few weeks ago. It's like, oh yeah.
Right.
She gets everything.
And those are things that I think it's good to be thinking about, and really to name that professionally what somebody might need is going to be very different.
And I'll share from my family's perspective, my brother's collegiate experience was a hot mess, and it culminated at one point in my dad driving up through the night to get to Madison to pull his son out of there. And so you'll hear that my brother went to UW-Madison. It's the city that my parents in some ways attribute to having lost their son, right? Some hard years there. And so he went there in 98, stopped going there in I think 2000, 2010 I moved there and I'm working there. And at that point, UW-Madison is like a 4-letter word in our family. You do not say it, we do not talk about that place. But I start working there. And they're kind of thawing a little bit, and then I meet her, and then they're like, okay, we love this place, right? But at the time, they were just not prepared to like the place at all, because it represented like a really kind of painful moment for our family. Also happened to be the closest Big Ten to where we lived, so it was like, you have your daughter as close as she'll ever live to you, and it's in a painful place, right? But if they had parented me according to those first 2 years for Jason, that would not have gone well, because I just didn't need what he needed, ultimately.
I think an important piece for you all to talk about at dinner at some point is really going to be, though, who makes the final decision? And this is one that we see students and families struggle with as they are deciding where to attend school, but then after folks are in their coursework. And sometimes we see some students who get there and they may have said, yeah, I want to study, and be an engineer, and then they get knee deep into those engineering classes and they're like, yeah, just kidding. But their parents are really invested, and they're like, no, you're gonna ride it out. And there is a woman who I still see at Hy-Vee to this day, and I will go to the other line because she cried in my office for 3 days straight, trying to convince her parents that she needed to leave because she was not ready to be an engineer. And so that question for that family, it was about managing the parents' expectations, but it also came down to who got to make the decision. And that's hard. And I want to name, like, post-secondary opportunities have a lot of time and a lot of emotions and a lot of money invested in them. And so thinking about now who gets to be that final decision maker is really important. And it's okay for you all to draw lines in the sand for yourselves as a family, and for your student. And there might be some push-pull there as they are, working on independence. And so I think that's something that you've got to think about.
Right, things may ebb and flow. I have a close friend who had a contract with her parents that she signed at the beginning of her college years. And it outlined like the conditions, and the conditions at the time were she would live on campus all 4 years, all these other things. Got to year, I'm gonna say 3, and she's like, let's renegotiate. At that point she had been an RA, or maybe it was year 4 because she did 5. She was an RA, she had been in this like serious relationship for a few years, and she managed to convince them, I still don't know how she did this, to be able to move off campus and live with him. And I'm just like, wow, they really like took a left turn from the contract at that point. Of course now she's married to him, so like it worked out well. And I just remember thinking like, oh, that's unique that you all have a contract, but also unique that they were able to revisit some of the terms of that.
And down to basically, who's paying for it, right? Because they're the ones who have the strings to pull.
So sometimes it does come down to it. And so for those who might not have heard, Jenny said, doesn't it come down to who's paying for it? And in some families, that's how it works.
And like in mine, my parents gave me the illusion of choice all the time, even though they were footing the bill for many things, right? So I think it has to do with like your level of comfort and what decisions you make as a family. They pay, they foot the bills for my student loans and pieces, but I got to make decisions on what I studied, where I studied, if I took summer classes, if I didn't, if I gallivanted in Europe for a summer, all the things, right? It's true.
Right. Yeah.
But they also were very consistent in saying to me all along that we'll do undergrad, you're gonna do anything else after. And I remember when they said that, and I'm like, hey, joke's on you, I'm never going to graduate school. And then I went to graduate school and I was like,
It's a
They
complicated
negotiated a better deal.
We absolutely see some students and some families really come to terms with that in really funky ways. And the complicated piece is that in society, once you turn 18, you're an adult.
Yep.
And yes, you're an adult, but there are funky different strengths. We know developmentally your brain is like a wet Cheeto at this point, so not fully formed. It's a good analogy.
What Cheeto?
A wet Cheeto.
It also has very absorbance, so that's lovely.
Right.
But no crunch.
No crunch at that point, yet at the same time, and I think this is important where it's good to recognize like some of our identities and some of our privilege. We've got folks who might say, oh, but they're in college, they're still a kid. I'm like, yeah, they are. But if they weren't in college and they were making these mistakes, we'd be talking about some pretty hefty legal ramifications. And so when we see students and families really kind of have some difficult moments about you know, oh, I don't want to pursue this, or I want to drop out. That's where that notion of who pays gets ugly at times. You know, and what the family norms and the family expectations are, especially if the student might not align with that, you know, through their way of being.
And again, I think it's about clarifying as a family, like who has that final decision point.
And parents, sometimes you guys get to draw that line and then just step back. And that's where that community of support can come into play really helpfully. You know, I think, you know, Angela's family had to do it, my family had to do it at different points of saying, okay, this is the choice that you've made, and here's all the things you gotta be ready for. And thinking about what that might mean financially, what that might mean for you to live independently. So.
And the thing I've appreciated about my parents after the fact, they will talk to me about decisions I made 10 years ago and be like, yeah, we didn't know what you were thinking. You left Cornell? That was a great job. What were you doing? And I'm like, oh, they seemed supportive and they allowed me to make the decision. But privately, they're back at home having the conversation of like, why is Angela making this choice? I don't understand. So I've made a variety of choices that they let me walk through and allowed me to learn from. When I see the amount I was making at Cornell and I have it like on my listing of things, I'm like, oh yeah, that was kind of silly to walk away from that. Great retirement benefits that I still am reaping the benefits of today, and that was from 1 year of work there, right? So they knew all those things at the time, but I didn't care about benefits, I didn't care about retirement at 25, right? So I appreciate that about them in retrospect, that they allowed me to kind of walk through and make decisions, and appreciated my level of independence when I would tell them, no, I'm not going to have that job clerking for a judge. Instead, I'm going to work at Potbelly's playing guitar for a couple hours every day. They allowed me to make those decisions. Were they the right decisions?
Sorry, so.
Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. Many ways to have a fabulous life. Okay, let's talk about some resources. You all have these down, and what we wanted to do was provide you all with a list of some internet resources from some nonpartisan sites that I think could be helpful for you all to be aware of. One is the College Scorecard. And I like this website because I think it's helpful for folks that might want to look at colleges, but also might want to look at other opportunities too. And so it's really basic, but you can discover career paths, and you can look at a variety of opportunities to kind of sort down colleges. There are a million different college search engines, but some of these that we've provided are some of the more basic ones, but give a lot of opportunity for you. So that's College Scorecard, again, linked by the Department of Education, and that's why I thought it was helpful. College Navigator, and what that does is that pulls in data from the integrated post-secondary education data system. So it's like all facts, nothing fancy, no frills to it, but I think again will show you some basic things about colleges and universities, about what they cost, what their 6-year graduation rate is, and that's helpful for folks to be aware of, is that nationally, when we have to report out, you know, how successful are they? If you're thinking graduation, we're thinking a 6-year rate. Even though in the back of our minds, many of us think, oh, only 4 years. So I think that piece of knowledge is handy to know. College Board. Some of you may have taken your PSATs, or you're getting ready to take your SATs and your ACTs. College Board is a jumping off point, and they too have a way that you can search for colleges and opportunities through them. The Common Application, and this is something that many institutions have adopted as a way for you to put in all your information and send it out to a variety of different schools. It's up to you to decide how many schools you want to apply for, and but it's a good way too, because then you can get connected with those that you might not have thought of based on the information that you've put in. And then lastly, the free application for federal student aid. And I think that this is an important piece for all of you to be thinking about, and I appreciate Jeff, he said, you know, it's good because I need to find all this paperwork for a retirement at some point in life. And so I think that that's.
You can tell how old I'm getting.
We're not getting old.
At some point.
At some point. You will hear the FAFSA talked about quite a bit. It is something that I encourage you to submit, even if you feel like, you know, we've got comfortable finances and can handle everything for our students. You never know when the inevitable may happen. My senior year in college, my dad lost his job, and we were able to go back in and resubmit And I was eligible for some support that I wouldn't have imagined. And that was really helpful for us to be able to know about. I will tell you, so to date myself, here we go, Jeff. I was the very first person in my high school to apply for college online when I did it at the University of Minnesota. We were still doing paper forms. And I think my experience, I named that because I think whenever we talk to friends and family about what it was like for them to search for colleges or to apply for colleges, it's constantly changing and evolving. You know, and I know that there are a number of folks that you could choose to follow on TikTok and YouTube to find out what they think about college. But I wanted to give you all some very bare bones places to start without the influence of others. And that's why I provided some of that here. That does not mean that social media does not have a place in checking it out, but I would encourage you to wait to engage until you've had some formative conversations as a family. Shannon,
What's the current best comprehensive site online for starting your scholarship search?
Scholarship.
For a scholarship search, I would actually start at studentaid.gov because it links out to a couple of other sites.
The high school counselors, they always have resources for
Yes.
colleges.
Virginia.
Yeah,
There's also a thing called ICANN,
Okay.
and it is actually offered when they're at school, they'll talk about it, and they can go, they host it at Kirkwood in Coralville, and they go in and they discuss FAFSA with you, applying for scholarships, they sit and work with you, and they give you logins, they help you set up your FAFSA account if you haven't done that yet, and that is free.
Okay, so what Jason mentioned was ICANN, and then Gary also mentioned working with the college guidance counselors, and high school ones, and they will let you know when those fairs are coming up, and so I would say attend those nights in person, because it's good to try to understand that. The other thing that I would say is to do this as a family, and so I know that we're running pretty short, but let's roll into the next website, or piece. Factors to consider. There are a ton of different ways to sort out, is this the right opportunity for me? And I named a variety of the big ones that I think many people start with, well, what do I want to be and what's my major, so what's my program of study? That feels like an easy way to start to narrow it down. But some other ones that we think are important to talk through are size. Because not everyone is meant to go to a small private institution. They might not thrive, in an environment where there's only 1,200 people. But then at the same token, you might not want to be on a campus with 35,000 other undergraduates. It's hard to envision for some folks what that really looks like. And that shell shock is real. You want to come see it? Come to campus this week. Okay. Location is very important. When I was searching for colleges, I grew up in the city of Milwaukee, and I knew that I needed to be in a city. Like, that's just who I am. There are moments when I still laugh about the fact that I live in Iowa, because I love city life, and I wanted that in my college experience. And so that was something that really narrowed down the options pretty darn fast for me. Accreditation, and I think that this is important, that wherever you go, in most major institutions, you don't have to worry about accreditation. But if you're looking at something that's very specific to your field, or you might be looking at some institutions that maybe you don't have experience with, I think it's important to look and verify that they are accredited, and to know whether or not they are nonprofit or for-profit. I think that's very helpful.
I think unique piece is that some schools may not have, like the entire school may not be accredited, but certain programs might be. The school that Jason ended up at did not have like accreditation across the board, but luckily the program that he chose was accredited.
And that can be helpful.
Yep.
It's another piece about that is career development, and many college offices will have a specific office for folks to get connected with careers, and that's something that we encourage you, even in your first year that you step on campus, to engage with. I noticed that Patty talked about where the high school guidance counselor said, oh yeah, they're underutilized. They're underutilized in their first year. Their fourth year, come that spring semester, their people are banging down their door. But absolutely, and career counselors would love to talk with you in your very first time that you visit campus. So we think it's good to talk about that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that's very important to us, and we think it should be important to you all too. You want to know, can you bring your whole self to school? you know, and that would be everything from, are you a first-gen college student? Are there other Presbyterians floating around in the neighborhood that you might want to get to know? Those are things that can be helpful, and it's good to know, will your campus be welcoming of that or not so much? And so that's important to talk about.
Flagship kind of universities that aren't often thought of as being big places for folks to go that have like bucked going to like a Harvard or something in lieu of, instead of going, well, and then going instead to like University of Alabama because they have a really great honors program, right? So I think looking into that, if that's something you're interested in, research opportunities are great to engage in and consider a high impact practice. So encourage any student, regardless of what they're studying, to engage in research if possible.
We know that you all are leaders and very engaged folks, and so thinking about what you might want to be involved in on campus is helpful to explore and to know, is there a breadth of that? And every college will love to brag about all of these fun pieces behind the scenes, but you can see that we've kind of stacked them in order of ways that we would encourage you to think about what's important to you as you narrow down that search. Your well-being is also important, and now more than ever, colleges are trying to support holistically students, and so it's good to know what are the ways that they can do that. Is there a student health center on campus that you could go to? Is there counseling available? And what does that look like? And depending on where you may be studying, there are resources, but it might take a little bit more to get access to those, and so it can be helpful to be aware of that if those are things that you might need. Safety is one that Angela and I talk about a lot.
Yes, no, I'm a big proponent of that in the sense that, so I work in the disciplinary area. I hear students often kind of critique the University of Iowa and say that we receive a lot of notifications of things that are hard to hear about. And in my mind, I'm thinking, no, this is pretty standard and average. I looked at our other Big Ten schools to see their numbers on their annual kind of security reports that they have to do federally. And many schools have different rates of incidents that happen. So it was helpful for me to see, like, are we having more than other schools? Are we having less? That's, I think, an important piece that I'm sure most people don't look at before they send their student to a school, but to understand the kinds of crime or the type of crime that happens locally to a school is helpful to know.
And then lastly, student life. Housing, because it's what I do, I think is something that you want to think about, and you want to think about where you might want to live and how you might want to be engaged, where you're going to eat on campus, what that'll look like. But I would say that's also something that you can start to think about later. And here's why that I say that, is because I noticed that I see a lot of folks right now making decisions about where they're going to campus based on the amenities that they might have access to. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to make your college or your post-secondary education decision.
I think the tail's wagging the dog in many of those cases, and I think it's inappropriate, right? Ideally, you're choosing for an education, for some of these other pieces that we listed. We didn't list a piece that I think is very important to me, if only because my mother drills it into my head: cost. I think that's, oh, we're getting there, okay. I'm like, cost is huge. Come on, gotta do it.
Okay, let's talk about this. So on this next slide, which is freaky small, but here's the practical stuff, and it's all on the handout. Number one that I want you all to think about, determining a family schedule for when you're actually going to talk about going to college or what's next after high school. Because if you don't make a schedule, you're never going to do it. Right? You got to schedule the meeting. So go to the library, get some coffee, come down here, come to our house. If you want to have a place, come on over. We'll have you for dinner. Sounds great. The other thing that we want you all to do is we encourage you to make a plan for how you're going to navigate tests, visits, and applications. And because you can get swamped by that pretty fast, and it can get fairly overwhelming. And so I think the other piece about that is talking about who's going to do what. I notice right now, all the parents are the ones in here taking notes, so like, I'm gonna remember this. But at the end of the day, it's your student's journey. And so we have a heavy emphasis on your student being the one to apply for things. The running joke in my office is that we get parents who will call and be impersonating their student and be like, oh yeah, well when we applied for housing, this is everything we did. And I'm like, sure, can we talk to Sam? Because did Sam actually do this? Sam's like, I don't know, my mom did it, right? And so those are things that you want to do. What are you thinking?
I also think that I'm not positive that it might be more use the word again, positive for colleges to see the student signing up for their own thing, and asking questions and talking and showing that initiative. Because I remember when I was younger and my mom wanted me to get a job, she like things and she took those steps and I didn't get that job. So.
Yeah, no, we are more than happy to engage with you all directly. And we're not scary people, you know? And so I think that's the other piece. We also know that, yes, there's a lot to navigate, but our processes are generally designed with you in mind, right? That's who we're thinking about. So at any step of the way, I encourage you all, and that's complicated, especially for those of us family members who have been through college and who have done it. It's like, oh, this will take me 2 minutes, I can knock this out. No, but your student has to learn how to do it. That's part of the process of them going to college, is learning how to navigate systems. Yes?
They need to do it so they can do it with a check.
That's right. Well, they need to do it like over their kids. No.
Well done.
You know what, that was great. So the other thing that I highly recommend is that when it comes down to the FAFSA or any financial related paperwork, that you all do it as a family. And I cannot stress that enough. The number of times that we hear from families that say, well, I write the check, so I want to know all the details. Your students got to communicate that to you, you know, and that gets really tough at moments. On the flip side, we also, Angela and I have seen situations where students and families have not had open communication about what that family financial situation looks like. And we have seen some really heartbreaking situations where, you know, you're working orientation mid-August and getting approached by a family, or not mid-August, it was mid-June at that point.
Still too late.
Still late, you know, saying, hey, can we talk about scholarships? You know,
Well, not even scholarships. They were asking about loans at that point, and in part means like if you haven't created a plan for it by mid-June, it's getting late.
Late, yeah. And my office is the one that will follow up with you if you have not paid your bill, and that's not fun. It's the worst part of my job, but it's also very realistic, because I don't want to have you accruing debt if you haven't already thought and talked about that. Which is why I can't say this enough, that you all just need to be really open and transparent about that, even if there's a change and a shift. Because what I don't want is for you to fall in love with a dream institution and go visit it and not have an idea of, can you all even afford this? And we see this more times than I really care to, and that's tough. It's really tough, and I know college is expensive. And many post-secondary opportunities have costs associated with that. They've changed significantly since even I went to school when Angela did and when many of our parents did. And I think that that's also a reality of this day and age right now that's hard for families, and especially hard for folks in older generations to really understand it. And so that's one of the reasons that we want to talk about. In a very similar vein, it's also important to talk about communication. So yes, you will still get mail, but you will get a lot of email and a lot of phone calls and a lot of text messages. And I think it's very important that you all talk through what is the best way that you all want to receive that communication, and how will you manage that? Because you're going to get a lot coming at you. And so I would recommend, if you can, create a dedicated email account and set up a regular schedule for checking it. Because many schools will say, okay, great, we're going to email you the information. It's your responsibility to read it and digest it and come on through. Some schools will do a courtesy and they'll copy families, but that will stop as soon as they really officially become a student. And so I think that's a big shift, especially as Angela and I are now getting access to like the app that parents have in the Iowa City School District. We're like, oh, there's a lot of communication coming. And so we're trying to figure out how to navigate that. Parents, get ready to know nothing. Yeah. And I just want to name that.
Not nothing. Everything that your student tells you. And ideally, you will be communicating, like you will set expectations of what communication will look like with your student. Mm-hmm. I was really determined to have my parents on the roller coaster ride with me, and they were going to know everything from that first calculus exam and how terrible that went, to clawing my way back for a B- at the end of the semester. And it was kind of fun in a weird way. Once I did, because I got the B-. Once I got the B- to feel like, oh, that was a really hard class, and we worked through it, and Angela was successful.
I think it's complex, you know, and I would say is important too, because there's so many things that you're navigating, a spreadsheet will be your best friend. And it's one of those small things, but I still have it from when I went to grad school, and I'm thankful that I did, because then when you need your transcripts 10 years later, you can call and try to figure out a good way to get it. But a spreadsheet can also be helpful because every school is going to have something that's slightly different for you to log in and submit your information, and you gotta remember, when did I apply for this, and what password did I use, and whose email address did I give? And so I think that that can be super helpful, and along with that, track the major deadlines. Because every school does it a little bit differently. And even in the state of Iowa, I can tell you, you have to accept your admission at Iowa State in order to apply for housing. Same thing at UNI. University of Iowa, you do not have to accept admission to apply for housing. And all three of us will assign you very differently. And so that's a thing that we notice, that students, as they're getting lost in the weeds at times about some important pieces. Okay, we are really coming up on time. And so our key takeaways. One is that there are lessons for everyone in the search process, and it's about creating that opportunity to grow and learn throughout your lifetime. And that everyone's experiencing a transition, for whether that be students and parents, but also siblings. And I will never forget the day that my brother was crying on the floor because he was worried that I wasn't going to get into college, right? That's my sweetie pie little brother who's now out in California. And there are multiple ways to live your best life, as Andy has proven to all of us, which is actually kind of awesome to think about with that. Now, regular communication is really, really important, particularly around this, and we know you all are so darn busy. So set those times right now and just make it a fun event, put something around it, and the more you can communicate early and often, the easier it will be in the long run. Expectations are best when they are clear, and also though that they can change. And thinking about, what are my expectations, what are your expectations, and how do we meet in between when we need to. And then also enjoy being in high school. I can't say that enough. Like, please just enjoy high school for what it is, so that way when you get to college, you can enjoy that too, if college is right for you, or whatever that next step is. Okay. What questions do you have for us? And I want to name, if you've got lunch right now that is your next question, then feel free to go to it. But we'll answer any questions you have today, and then we'll also plan for a follow-up conversation as a community.
Let's just leave people able to come up and talk with you a little bit.
Yep, let's do that.
Sorry. Just looking at the time, we've been here for over an hour. I see a little fidgeting in the seats. I see other people ready to pounce and ask some questions as well. I think what I want to say is, first, let's give a hand to Angela. As many of you know, my oldest daughter Lengel went through the college search last year, so this has been on my heart. And when I was chatting with Virginia a little bit about this, she said, "Oh, Jeff, anytime that you want to ask a question, you can ask me." And I thought, I know a lot of families in this church who want to take you up on that offer. So if I want you to know, you're both available for questions by email today and after, and we're hoping this is just the first of conversations. Some of these conversations, maybe you guys with the students specifically, so when parents are out of the room, they can ask the questions they really want to ask.
That's fair.
Others of them, you might be with parents who really want to ask questions that they want to ask without their kids there as well. And some may be over Zoom. In a couple months, in a couple weeks, hopefully we can say something maybe after college applications are due, or open up anyway, and the FAFSA is due, or some other things, that there are other things going on in the process. I can't thank you enough for being here, and we'll follow up more on it. Pastor Rob, would you close us in prayer, please?
Please join with me in prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this opportunity to talk about college and the possibilities that lie ahead. We give you thanks for Angela and for Virginia for being present to us. We look forward to further conversations with them as well. So now, as we return to our homes, we would ask that your Holy Spirit would graciously guide us now and in the days to come.